Hey, sorry. I thought I would get to know you a little before I started, because I'm kind of curious about who's actually here. Would you mind all standing up? If you are a tester, can you sit down? See, that's interesting to me. Thank you for playing. You can sit down. So my talk is not about testing. It's also not entirely about chocolate, but the very beginning of it is. So I would like you to use your imagination. I would like you to imagine a primary school in a village in rural India 10 years ago. So you might be imagining some really happy kids running around. Imagine them getting to school, they hang up their bags, and their morning routine is to go to assembly, where they all have to say a prayer to start the day. And the way this works is the children kneel down, they shut their eyes and say their prayer, and when they open their eyes, there's a chocolate bar in front of them. And they think this is pretty awesome, and they eat their chocolate bar and they go to class. Every day, same thing. They say their prayer, they get chocolate. If we wind forward 5 years, so 5 years ago, the children arrive at morning assembly, they're about to do their prayer, and they see that the chocolate bar is already there. And some of the children think, yoink, eat their chocolate, go to class, don't do their prayer. And the very conscientious and sincere students will still do their prayer, take their chocolate and eat it, and go to class. But after a few days of watching their classmates just get free chocolate, they're like, no praying for me either. Chocolate is the way. Let's come forward another 5 years to today. Imagine that you started at this school this week, and you arrive with your bag and you're really excited because you're 5 years old, and you go to your class, you go to assembly, and everyone gets free chocolate. And you're like, man, this is the best school ever. And then on Tuesday, you get free chocolate. And on Wednesday, you get free chocolate. And by this time, you're thinking, how come we get this chocolate? And you say to a kid in your class, what's this about? Why with the chocolate? And the kid says, I don't know. My older brother said that we used to have to do prayer to get the chocolate, but he's my older brother and I don't really trust him, so, who knows? So what has happened between 10 years ago and today? So here, chocolate was a reward for a practice that the school were trying to encourage the students to do. Over here, the practice is gone entirely, and only the chocolate remains. So I want you to try and map prayer and chocolate to BDD and test automation. The original proponents of BDD wanted it to solve a certain set of problems, and test automation was the chocolate that followed. But have you been part of teams where the practice has disappeared and everyone's just gorging themselves? So this story is taken from an article written by Katrina Clokie. It's called Chocolate and Prayer, an Anti-Pattern for BDD. And I read this article a few months ago, and it prompted the idea for this talk, because it really resonated with me as a way that I've seen BDD kind of turn out bad, I guess you would say. So before I move on, there is a bug in this slide. If you can tell me what it is, I will give you a chocolate bar. Does anyone know what the bug is? Please raise your hand. Tell me. No, the spelling is all correct, I hope. Oh, you can't see the slide. See, this is why. Shit. What is happening? What is happening? Let's try this. Haha. Here is the slide on which there is a bug. There is a small chocolate bar to reward you should you be able to find the bug. Tell me. Yes, Kit Kats don't have squares. Kit Kat. It's yours. Well done. All right, I drew the slide. I put it up. I did this talk in front of a team of testers. And then I went, oh. So, yay, we're working. I want to talk to you about a couple of things. So, Srini Kulkarni's post made me think about my experiences with BDD. And originally I kind of thought this might be a life cycle, but the more I thought about this, I decided it was a roadmap. And I want to talk about the roadmap that I've built from reflecting on the experiences I've had in different teams. And then I want to talk a bit about how you move around this map and how you drive change if you think you're in the wrong place. So, this is really weird. My screen has a totally different thing to that screen. BDD, every team I've been in, begins with someone saying, we should do BDD. And this person may or may not have anything to do with your team. And they come and say this to you, and everyone has different reactions. Some people will think, oh yeah, I know what ATDD is, or TDD, or I know what specification by example is, so I know what this is. Some people might have a really positive reaction. They think, oh, the business is going to get more engaged with us, or oh, this means we'll get to do automation. Some people have a really negative reaction, like, oh, the business is going to spy on us, or now we're going to have to add English to all our automation suites, and that's going to take forever. Someone will come in and kick it off. And then I've seen two things happen. The first is that you are in a team that goes to BDD land, the theme park of learning, their balloons and people. And in this theme park, you might get to read books and articles about BDD. You might get to go to a conference. You might get a consultant coming in to teach you about BDD. It's a very exciting place for lots of people. I've seen teams get stuck here. They forget that you can learn something new every day, even if you're not in BDD land. I've also seen teams go here who hated every second. And their manager has sent them here to learn about BDD. And if someone tells you to learn something, you probably won't. Because learning is about having a mindset of learning something new. So BDD land. Then there's the teams who take the other road and drive straight past. And in this bus, there might be some really sad people with their faces pressed up to the window, watching all the fun in BDD land and wishing that their manager wasn't such a tight ass. There also might be some people who don't care, and they think they already know what BDD is, and BDD land is for noobs. And I found a great quote online from Henry Winkler, who was the Fonz in Happy Days. Assumptions are the termites of relationships. And I thought, yes, assumptions are the termites of BDD, because some of those people on the bus who think they're all good actually don't know what they're doing. And you might have both types of people on your bus in one team, right? So some teams go to BDD land, some teams drive straight past. Either way, you end up in a meeting. Someone sent out an invite, probably says something like BDD kickoff. And there's nothing in the message other than that title, which is my pet peeve about getting meeting invites. And everyone goes and sits in this room and looks at each other. And then there's this realization, that this is hard. And it doesn't matter which road you took to get here, this seems to happen every time. Because this is the point where you have to collaborate with the people around you, and that is a difficult skill to build. So from here, you can consider this picture kind of a roundabout in the roadmap. So from here, some teams turn around and go back, or the manager finds some cash to send the team for the first time, and they go to BDD land and go learn about it and then try it again. Some teams from This Is Hard will simply give up. So I've seen this happen particularly where the champion, the person who comes up to the team and says, we should do BDD, is actually not in the team. And the team sit in the room, realize it's really hard, and decide it's actually not worth it. And they just stop. From This Is Hard, I've been in teams where people say, you know what, if it's hard, we should do it more often, which you probably hear a bit in software development. And they call 6 meetings. I was in a team, true story, government department, 6 hours of specification by example workshops in a 2-week sprint, on top of our planning, which the project manager came in and said, why are you spending 8% of my budget in specification by example workshops? And that's how that died. Or from This Is Hard, I've also been in teams where someone said, you know what, the reason this is hard is because we are not adhering to the structure of given, when, then. And we need to respect these boxes, we need to use these words, and it's very clear what we should be doing here. Different government department, I was in a 1-hour meeting where we spent the whole hour writing a when clause, because there was disagreement about whether it was the when clause or maybe it was the given clause, and also someone had a specific issue with one of the words. So in that team, BDD died from pedantry. Pedant is a person who's really obsessed with minor detail. So this is starting to build up a roadmap from we should do BDD. Where does that go? It's not all doom and gloom. So there is a positive place that you can head to. And I like to call this the Glorious Mountains of Bdd. So in 2006, Dan North, who was the originator of BDD, talked about BDD being about agile acceptance criteria and automated checks. And I have the language of that wrong, but I did get a direct quote, so I know it's true. And I see the mountains of BDD as those 2 discrete parts. So the conversation mountain is us trying to develop agile acceptance criteria. The coding mountain is us trying to do our automated checks that back it up. And in a really good team, there's like a superhighway bridge between these 2 things. And I realized after I drew this that I should have drawn the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but actually I don't think I could have, so in some ways I'm glad. You can imagine this as like the San Francisco Bridge or some other awesome highway. And in a team where there's the superhighway, the business are really happy to go across to Coding Mountain and be part of creating living documentation from your test automation. And the developers are really happy to go across to Conversation Mountain and be part of creating agile acceptance criteria on stories and developing shared understanding of what they're going to build. And there's a free flow of traffic between the 2, and people are happy and collaborating freely. Then there are the teams where there's those shaky bridges like you see in movies such as Indiana Jones or Monty Python, where it's over the gorge of peril of something, bridge of death. And it's not safe. And when a business person goes to Coding Mountain and they feel lost and judged and it's scary over there, and when a coding person goes to Conversation Mountain, they are bored and they are disengaged and they kind of subvert the process. And people start to think, actually, it would be just easier if we did this ourselves. And you might end up in a team who do. And the bridge is gone. So there are a lot of teams in my organisation who live on Coding Mountain. And it's like creating artifacts that archaeologists discover. So you pick up something and you've got no idea of the context of what you found or the history of it. Ooh, ghosts. And you try and assign meaning because you've just discovered this thing. So a business person coming over to Coding Mountain when there's no bridge, it's like an archaeology thing. They're just looking at stuff they've got no understanding about. And when you've only got Conversation Mountain, you end up with really beautiful stories written in Rally or Jira that never go anywhere. There's no test automation with it. But boy, howdy, are those stories amazing. Amazing. And then it reaches a point where you're actually like, you know what, are we even doing BDD at this point? And the whole thing dies from kind of an existential crisis. So I've also seen this. I've been part of an organisation where we ripped off our BDD layer of our automation because we'd ended up on Coding Mountain and there was no point. So this was the map for me. This is from my experiences with BDD. It's not like the map of all of BDD ever. It's purposefully drawn in a childlike way it's not carved in stone. But I found this really useful to reflect on. And it also made me start thinking about, if you know something like this, how can you try and consciously drive a team to the Glorious Mountains? So I want to talk a little bit about how do you drive the bus. So the first thing here is that you want to think about who your driver is. So I've been in teams where the champion was outside of the team, and in that meeting where everything's really hard, no one is driving. And you don't know where you're going, and it's really frustrating. It feels like a waste of time. I've also been in teams where multiple people went to a conference, came back and decided they wanted to do BDD, and they both had slightly different ideas of what that meant. And there was more than one person pulling us in more than one direction, which was also incredibly frustrating and felt like a waste of time. Even in a team where there's one driver, they still might be going somewhere that you don't agree with. They might be going too slowly. You might still end up really frustrated. So how do you identify the person who's going to lead this process change, and how do you make sure you end up in the right place? My suggestion is that you try to collaboratively build what the roadmap of BDD looks like in your organisation. So each of the people in your team will have had different experiences and be able to contribute different maps, different roads, different destinations, different pitfalls. Your organisation might have some political swamps that you need to navigate around. Your organisation, the environment that you're in will influence maybe the number of roads or the number of steps you have to take to get to where you're going. And by doing this together, your team is having an honest, collaborative discussion about what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to get there and what the aim of this is. So you can start to pull each other up if you get off this path. So if you've all drawn the map, if you see that you're doing something that's heading towards one of your dead ends, or if you see people getting frustrated or disengaged, you can start to ask them where they feel like they are on this, where they'd like to be. Are we going too slow, too fast? And drive some of the discussion that you need to have, like at a meta level, about what the BDD process is, to try and keep people on the same page about where you're heading and how you're going to get there. So, I would like to encourage you to reflect on your experiences with BDD, to ask your team to participate in an exercise where you try to create a roadmap for BDD in your organisation, in your team. What does it look like? How could you fail? Where are you trying to go? Have some conversations about who's driving the change. Hold each other accountable if things go wrong. And I wish you luck in reaching the glorious mountains. I hope you succeed. Thank you. Do I have question time? I have question time. If you would like to ask questions, I would be happy to answer them. Do you have one? The closest I've ever got to the mountains. I feel like the team I'm in, so it's really hard to stay in the mountains with an awesome bridge. So I've been there, but not for long. And I've got to say, when that bridge was decaying, sometimes you as the tester would like lay yourself down on the missing bricks to try and get people to walk across there. But it did fall away, and then, so I have been there, but not consistently. And it's really frustrating when you end up in one of those isolated places where either you've got awesome stories in Rally that no one is using, or you've got awesome test automation that no one's engaged in. To me, that's the most frustrating place for it to die, because you've been where it was good, and it falls away. Yeah. Yep. So how do you bring it back? It depends on what the value is to the new team. So if you're the only person who's experienced the hum and you can't articulate the reason that the current process isn't humming, then it might be really hard to persuade people to do that U-turn. And my experience has been that it's really hard to articulate what it means to be in a team where it's working really well. I would like to, in future, use an activity like this to try and illustrate where we're trying to go and why, maybe as like a retro activity. But I don't have like 100% Katrina Clokie guaranteed, here is the way that you do that. But that's kind of, think about why, what will benefit your team specifically if you change back, and try and bring that idea forward in a collaborative way so that people feel part of setting that course. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, that was my fault. Go.
So, for example, what kind of recommendation, or what do you think, let me start that again. For an organization that has very low testing maturity already and also not a great ratio between developers and testers, would you say there's any prerequisites before starting BDD? Is there a better time to go towards that direction in your experience?
So they don't have testers, but they have business people and devs.
So talking about, many smaller organizations, many late generation startups have very low testing maturity internally in general, so they have low testing capability, often only one person who knows a bit about testing and a whole bunch of developers writing code. So at what point, what would you say in that scenario would have to be in place in order to start thinking about BDD? Or do you think it doesn't matter, there's no prerequisites?
So the first thing I would say is BDD isn't a test technique. It's often something that's led by testers because we really want it to happen. And like I was saying before, lying down on that bridge, like that is in some ways is the testing role, trying to bridge between the business and the devs. But BDD as a practice can create that bridge without the tester being there, which might be quite a confronting thing to say here. But it's not a testing practice. So in terms of prerequisites for an organization where there's only devs and business people, I would say having the champion of that being a person in the team is something that I think would be really important for it to succeed, because if that team feel like it's coming from outside, I feel pretty confident that they would probably just reject it and give up. Yeah.
Hi, I just want to know, so how can we know we are on the right track to the Glorious Mountains, or we already arrived?
How do you know you're on the right track? So, there is more than one road to reach the Glorious Mountains. The roadmap was vastly simplified because slides. So I guess the first thing I want to say there is no right road. And the reason I ended up drawing a roadmap instead of a life cycle is that it's actually really messy, and there are a lot of places you can go. And even though organizational roadmaps are often a single lane gauntlet, a real roadmap actually has a lot of options and places. How do you know you're on the right road? Retrospectives, talking in your team. If you're having a meeting or a BDD type of session and you're seeing a lot of closed body language, people falling asleep, people, like one or two people contributing and no one else, there are signs. If you work in an organization where you're not having open retrospectives, there are still signs that you'll see if people are unhappy. And on the flip side of that, there's stuff you'll see if people are engaged and enjoying it. So if you're running BDD sessions and there's active participation and people are excited about going to them, and you can see those sessions flowing through into the work that the team are doing, then you're probably on the right road for your team.
Okay, thank you.
I have 54 seconds, which apparently means I can have one more question.
So when you say BDD sessions, and you were talking about 6 hours earlier on for a session, I always assumed, the session is coming back to the book and using the words, the three amigos, so it's small people getting a common understanding of what's going on. So where do you get this sessions in? And normally a session to me sounds long.
So I've worked in teams that have done it different ways, and it depends on when we are preparing our work. So in teams where I've worked on in a Scrum environment, we've done our BDD sessions at the same time broadly as our sprint planning. So all of the work for that chunk kind of gets prepped at the same time. When I've worked in Kanban teams, when you pull work through kind of constantly, I've done them in a Three Amigos type of like, in a stand-up, someone will pull in the work, the three people needed for a conversation, like people volunteer, the conversation happens when the work is pulled into development, and then it's much less of like a meeting. But in the Scrum teams I've worked in, we've always had it in sessions, and I don't know if that's right or wrong, that's just been my experience. 0 seconds. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you.
Can I do one more plug? Is this still, yeah. I just want to do one more plug for Testing Trapeze. It's really hard to find Australians to write for me because I don't know many of you. If you would like to write, I would really like to hear from you. We always have first-time writers. We're really supportive. We do peer review. We want to make you look awesome. Our magazine is really pretty. You can show your mum. She'll be proud. Please come and talk to me if you'd like to write for us. Thanks.
Cool.